Hey there, guys. All right, and today we are on to week 94 of World War II, June 13th, 1941. Finland and France join Hitler. We got a new angle today, and I think that's a new vest. Don't recognize that purple, so yeah, let's dive in.
Russia? What? In the Middle East? And Iberia? Geez, somebody's got a serious bucket list. What? What's a bucket list? It's a. Never mind. June 13th, 1941. We've seen the Germans or the Italians invade a bunch of places in the past couple of years, but this week it's not them. This week, the Allies invade Syria.
Done.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Anglo-Iraqi War ended after just a month with a British victory. The British were, however, evacuating Crete, which fell to the Germans. Also, at the end of last week, Adolf Hitler issued the Commissar Decree to all of his commanders. We talked about this at the end of March. It is his guidelines for how to treat the enemy during his impending invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. But it's not just going to be Germany invading. On the 8th, the 1st German infantry unit arrives in Finland. Finland, though, is not an Axis power. It's going to be a co-belligerent against the Soviets, who themselves invaded Finland and took a bunch of territory a year and a half ago. On the 10th, the Germans begin Operation Wartburg, a 10-day mine-laying operation in the Baltic aimed at preventing the Soviet Baltic fleet from escaping into the North Sea once things begin. The 12th, Hitler talks with Romanian conductor Ion Antonescu. Hitler does not
Yeah, I feel like the Nazis aren't being all that secretive with this invasion plan here.
ask for Romanian assistance, but says he merely expected of Romania that in her own interest she do everything to facilitate a successful conclusion of this conflict. Romania, unlike Hungary, Italy, and Bulgaria, had gotten nothing from the Greek and Yugoslavian campaigns 2 months ago, so Antonescu jumps at the chance to retake Bessarabia from the Soviets. That day also comes Führer Directive number 32. This calls for Operation Orient, which is to take place after the defeat of the USSR and the destruction of its military forces. This will link Germany and Japan through the Middle East. It's a pretty ambitious directive, and the plans also involve Operation Isabella to secure the Atlantic coastline of Spain and Portugal, to drive the British from Gibraltar with or without Spanish help, and to pressure Turkey and Iran to help them against Britain, whether directly or indirectly. There are plans to drive the British from the Suez Canal and Palestine by launching converging attacks from North Africa and from Bulgaria through Turkey. Tobruk, now under siege in North Africa, must be eliminated. If conditions are favorable after Barbarossa, then a German force could hit Iraq from Transcaucasia. And of course, the siege of Britain must resume after the campaign in the East comes to its end. So that's a pretty big to-do list. It all depends, of course, on a successful outcome of the fight versus the USSR, who might eventually have some allies, or not.
Who?
On June 13th, in a serious attempt to show the Soviet Union that she would not be left to fight Hitler alone, Churchill offered to send Stalin a British military mission in the event of a German attack. It would seem, however, that Stalin considered this offer a provocation, part of a British scheme to precipitate him into the war against Germany. His reaction was similarly suspicious when Churchill sent him details about the German divisions concentrating on the Soviet frontier.
Oh God, Stalin
These
is
details
paranoid.
have been culled from the Germans' own top-secret Enigma messages. It was also on June 13th that Admiral Kuznetsov, the Soviet Navy commissar visiting Stalin in the Kremlin, failed to arouse his concern about recent German naval movements, or to elicit from him a request to prepare the Soviet naval forces for action. The Germans are extremely optimistic about their plans, and it isn't just because of their recent military successes and the state of their armed forces. There is also how they see their opposition. As we saw last year during the Winter War, the Red Army was pretty badly
God, that was still only just like a year ago. Feels like it's been longer.
humiliated by Little Finland. And Germany saw that too. Certainly, a big part of the reason for the Soviets' poor performance is Stalin's Red Army purges in 1937 and 1938 that removed or killed more of the high officers of the Red Army than any war against any enemy would have. We covered all that in our Between Two Wars series, but in brief, the first one to go was Mikhail Tukhachevsky, Red Army Chief of Staff and a major hero. He was one of the old Tsar's officers who had really come into his own fighting in the Russian Civil War. He was nothing but professional, practical leadership. He led in the Polish-Soviet War. He put down the Kronstadt uprising. He championed armored and mechanized corps in the army and worked for its modernization for a decade and a half. He was executed along with 7 other generals June 11, 1937. By the end of the next year and a half, 3 of the 5 Soviet marshals were dead. Damn. 80% of the army commanders,
Damn.
half of the divisional commanders,
Damn.
and nearly half of the brigadiers.
Damn.
That was just the figures for the military side. It was worse in army administration and the political military appointments. Of 11 deputy commissars for defense, 11 were killed.
Oh.
All of them. 75 out of 80 members of the military Soviet, all military district commanders, and most of the party commissars were gone.
Didn't know it was... Like, I knew it was bad. Didn't think it was that bad.
If you wonder what they do, it's their job to make sure that soldiers do not take decisions or actions that the party might not like. Again, if you want to know more about the whys and hows of the Soviet purges, check out our Between Two Wars episode about it, link at the end. 5 men who the purge raised to high military leadership were Semyon Budeny, Kliment Voroshilov, Semyon Timoshenko, Lev Meklis, and Grigory Kulik. Here is a quote from John Keegan that sums up some of their qualities. Their advancement was not to Russia's military advantage. Budeny had a fine mustache, but no military brain. Meklis, the chief...
I mean, a fine mustache is really all you need, isn't it?
Commissar seemed, in Professor John Erickson's words, to have combined a monumental incompetence with a fierce detestation of the officer corps. Timoshenko was at least competent, but a political rather than a military commander. Kulik, head of ordnance, was a technological reactionary who opposed the distribution of automatic weapons to soldiers on the grounds that they were incapable of handling them, and halted the production of anti-tank and anti-aircraft guns. Voroshilov was worst of all. In 1934, apparently for no better reason than Tukhachevsky's advocacy of the independent armored force, he argued, "It is almost axiomatic that such a powerful force as the tank corps is a very far-fetched idea, and we should therefore have nothing to do with it." Immediately after Tukhachevsky's removal, he abolished all tank formations larger than a brigade. Since last year, and the debacle against Finland, Timoshenko, as Commissar for Defense, has been doing what he can to repair the damage done to the army by purge and incompetence. He's restarted and rebuilt the armored program, built defenses in the territory taken in Poland, and promoted officers of proven quality like Georgy Zhukov.
Okay.
He's also demoted the political commissars, and this is a pretty big thing. After the revolution, they were put in place to prevent treachery, and they had the power to veto actual military orders. They had this power up to 1934, then they got it again after the purges, but now they only have consultative powers and are responsible for the political education of the troops. This is a big weight off the shoulders of the military commanders. Well, what the Germans see is that the German army overran France, whom everyone had considered had the world's best army, in 6 weeks, and the Soviet army spent nearly 4 months failing to overrun little Finland and its little army. So the Germans are pretty confident. And in the USSR on the 13th, news agency TASS officially denies that there is any tension between the Soviet Union and Germany, saying that there could be no misunderstanding between the two countries. Well, that Axis offensive is not the only offensive soon to come, however. Last week, I said I'd talk today about the tactical plans for Operation Battle Axe, the coming British offensive in North Africa. What Noel Beresford Pierce, field commander, wants to do is first send out his 2 infantry brigades and the 4th Armored Brigade from the 7th Armored Division, temporarily under Frank Messervy's command, to defeat the enemy throughout the area of Halfaya, Sollum, Bardia, and Kaputso, while the rest of the armor, The support group and 2 cruiser regiments from the 7th Armored Brigade guards their left flank. That armor would advance to the Hafid Ridge area while Messervy's force was clearing the Halfaya passes. Beresford Pierce hopes that a tank battle will develop from the advance of the 7th Armored Brigade, and then the 4th Armored Brigade would rejoin them for that. Archie Wavell, in overall command of the whole theater of war, is worried about this operation in general. He thinks his tanks break down too often, and many of them, the Matilda 1s, are too slow in his eyes for desert warfare. He's already reported his misgivings to the General Staff 2 weeks ago and wrote that while he thought they'd be successful initially, he did not think they were strong enough for anything after phase 1 of the battle, like getting close enough to Tobruk to support the garrison under siege there. The offensive is scheduled to begin in 2 days. Wavell has a lot more on his plate, though, for there is an Allied offensive in the Middle East that begins this week, the invasion of Syria. If there is any doubt about the Vichy French policy of collaborating with the Reich, that vanished on June 10th, 1941. That day, Darlan, speaking for Pétain, speaking to the French people, urged for the necessity of collaborating with Germans as the only alternative to national suicide. The open broadcast speech by Darlan showed the United States, and especially the British, to what extent the Vichy French government admittedly was willing to go to appease the German government, to appear righteous to their people. American Secretary of State Cordell Hull thinks it preposterous to expect Adolf Hitler to give more favorable terms should the conquered peoples prostrate themselves and bestow upon him unrestrained license to deal as he may see fit with their lives, their liberties, and their entire welfare. Why did I tell you that? Because the Vichy French control Syria, and having that in German hands would be a serious issue for the whole Middle East. On June 8th, Free French forces and British-led forces from a variety of nations, as I mentioned last week, crossed the border into Syria. Operation Exporter has begun. The attackers have been worried about a German presence in Syria, though the Germans have all actually left by request of the Vichy French. The Allies soon take Tyr, Marjayoun, and El Quneitra in an advance from Palestine. On the 9th, the invaders reach the Litani River, pushing back the Vichy French. Side note, Moshe Dayan loses an eye leading an Australian unit this day. He gains fame the next day when his story is published. A British commando from Cyprus helps the Australians.
But I know I usually make a meme out of that. It's one of those times where I'm like, I genuinely do not know who the fuck that guy is.
But it takes heavy casualties. On the 10th, the Australians begin crossing the river. On the 13th, the Australian 21st Brigade begins attacks around Sidon. It will fall the 15th after they overcome a strong French counterattack. Also the 13th, the Australians win the Battle of Jezin. This is units from the 7th Australian Division, the same as those at Sidon. Jezin is halfway from the border to Beirut. The Free French, the middle prong of the invasion from the south, make good headway this week, and by the 12th are within 20 kilometers of Damascus. And so it is some 20 kilometers from Damascus that I will end this week of the war, with an invasion in Syria and plans, and more plans made for an Allied offensive in North Africa, and all sorts of German enterprises on 3 continents. So we have French people fighting other French people in Syria.
Sounds like normal French activities.
To stop Hitler.
Quite frankly.
It's amazing that that's where we've come after not all that many months of war. But you know what? It is going to get lost in the shuffle, because it is now clear that nothing can stop Adolf Hitler from very soon launching the largest military offensive of all time. Nothing. If you'd like to learn...
And that was week 94 of World War II, June 13th, 1941. Finland and France join Hitler. Another week where things happen. Nothing to really talk about, so I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.